Have you ever wondered why a man's heart burns fiercest for the woman who refuses him? Why his mind spirals into obsession when she slips just beyond his grasp? It is not a mystery of mere desire, but a forbidden truth woven deep into the architecture of the psyche. Carl Jung once wrote that what we cannot possess in the external world becomes an image inside the unconscious, magnified, exaggerated, transformed into something greater than reality. And so, the unattainable woman is no longer just flesh and bone. She becomes an archetype, an emblem of everything the man's soul both yearns for and fears. The man who meets resistance does not see only a woman standing before him. He sees the ghost of his childhood longings, the echo of every rejection, the shadow of every inadequacy he has tried to bury. In her refusal, his own ego trembles, and rather than accept this truth, his unconscious seizes upon her image, enlarging it into an idol. The very act of not having her carves her into the mythology of his mind. She becomes not just a woman, but the woman. The one who slipped away, the one who embodies his failure, the one whose absence screams louder than any presence ever could. This is why men crave what they cannot have. The unattainable woman exposes their shadow. She mirrors back to them the fragility of their own power, the incompleteness of their own self. To conquer her, in his mind, would be to conquer his own doubt. To hold her, in his imagination, would be to silence the roaring of his inner void. And yet, it is this very chase, this attempt to heal a fracture with possession, that ensures he remains enslaved by her absence. You have seen this in their eyes, haven't you? That restless hunger, that gnawing pursuit, the strange intensity with which they watch the woman who denies them. It is not love. Love is quiet, patient, secure. What you witness is the alchemy of obsession, desire fused with ego, attraction bound with fear, and it burns because it is forbidden. The forbidden carries the weight of the unconscious, the untouchable, the sacred. Most women misunderstand this dance. They believe a man's craving is proof of her worth. But this craving is not about her essence. It is about his wound. His hunger is less about who she is, and more about what she awakens in him. You must never confuse his obsession with devotion. An obsessed man does not see you clearly. He sees through the distorted glass of his own psyche. You are the screen upon which his unresolved battles play out. And yet, there is power in this role. The woman who embodies the unattainable becomes the awakener of the male unconscious. She is the one who stirs the archetype of the anima, the inner feminine Jung spoke of, the hidden key to a man's soul. Every man carries within him an image of womanhood that is incomplete, fragmented, distorted by culture and personal history. When he meets a woman he cannot possess, the anima erupts violently. She stands at the threshold of his psyche, demanding recognition, forcing him to confront his own lack. This is why some men collapse when faced with rejection, while others transform. The unattainable woman is the gatekeeper of initiation. To the weak man, she is torment, the eternal reminder of what he cannot conquer. To the strong man, she is revelation, a call to turn inward and seek the missing pieces of himself. And so you must ask yourself, when a man craves you, is it you he truly craves? Or is it the mirror you hold to his shadow? If he longs for you only because you evade him, then you are not his beloved. You are his teacher, his challenger, the flame that scorches the illusions of his ego. But here lies the danger. Many women, intoxicated by this power, fall into the trap of mistaking obsession for love. They see his hunger, his persistence, his sleepless nights, and think, surely this is proof of my value. But Jung reminds us, the shadow loves fiercely, but it does not love truthfully. To be desired as an image is not the same as being cherished as a soul. To be chased for what you awaken in him is not the same as being chosen for who you are. And yet, if you understand this, if you can stand in your truth, then his craving becomes a mirror for you as well, because his obsession is not just about his unconscious, it tempts yours too. To be wanted so deeply touches the ancient wound within you, the hunger to be seen, to be valued, to be irreplaceable. If you do not stand firm in your self-worth, you will confuse his desperation with destiny. The forbidden truth, then, is this: a man craves the woman he cannot have because she awakens his shadow. But whether that craving becomes his destruction or his transformation depends not on him alone, but on her clarity. For the woman who knows this secret walks the line between being idolized and being free. The man's longing intensifies in the silence of what he cannot possess. Deprived of her presence, his imagination becomes a relentless architect, constructing fantasies more intoxicating than reality itself. The woman he cannot have becomes a phantom stitched with perfection, a figure far more radiant than flesh could ever sustain. And here lies the cruel paradox. The further away she drifts, the more deeply she roots herself in his psyche. What is absent becomes omnipresent. What is denied becomes divine. Jung warned that what we repress returns in symbolic form, more powerful than before. And so, the denied woman is not merely denied, she is exalted, transformed into myth. She becomes his Helen of Troy, his Beatrice, his forbidden Eve. She no longer walks among mortals. She becomes a story carved into his unconscious, a wound that speaks in poetry and pain. Every glance she once gave him, every word she once spoke, becomes amplified in memory until it echoes like prophecy. But you must see this for what it is. The woman in his mind is not the woman in the world. The woman in his mind is the anima, cloaked in projection. She is not herself. She is his unfinished symphony. The more he clings to her absence, the less he sees her reality. And yet, this blindness fuels the craving. For when a man confuses his own incompleteness with another's essence, the hunger never ends. It is a hunger not for her, but for himself. And this is why women often ask, "Why does he seem to love me more when I pull away? Why does my refusal spark his desire?" The answer is found in the alchemy of denial. The masculine ego thrives on conquest, on proof of dominance, on measurable victory. To be met with surrender satisfies the surface, but to be met with resistance awakens the depths. Denial forces him into contact with his shadow, with the realization that he is not omnipotent. And in this humiliation, desire burns hotter. Yet here lies a dangerous truth. The man who craves what he cannot have is not necessarily seeking union. He is seeking validation. He may chase you not because of who you are, but because your distance threatens his identity. And if you give yourself to him, the spell often breaks. The myth dissolves into flesh, the fantasy collapses into reality, and suddenly the woman, once divine, becomes simply human. His craving fades, and what was once worship turns to indifference. This cycle has broken many women. They mistake obsession for love, thinking that to finally be chosen will cement their value. But when they yield, they discover that the fire was never about them. It was about the man's struggle with himself. And so they are left hollow, wondering how passion so consuming could vanish overnight. This is why the wise woman must learn to see beyond the hunger in his eyes. She must ask herself, is he drawn to me or to the distance I represent? Does he desire my soul or the reflection of his own shadow? Because only a woman anchored in her self-worth can resist the intoxication of being idolized. You must remember, too, that craving is not always conscious. A man may not realize why he feels this magnetic pull toward the one who resists him. He may even convince himself it is love, destiny, some cosmic design. But the unconscious speaks in symbols, not reason. His craving is the soul's riddle, not the heart's clarity. And unless he dares to face his shadow, he will remain enslaved to illusions. The Stoics knew this truth as well. Marcus Aurelius reminded us that the more we cling to what is not ours, the more we suffer. Desire without discipline is captivity. To crave endlessly that which resists us is to surrender our peace to fantasy. Seneca warned that the greatest chains are not forged by iron, but by longing. And so, the man who craves the unattainable is not powerful. He is imprisoned. But here, hidden beneath the torment, lies potential. For every obsession is also a doorway. When a man confronts the fact that what he longs for cannot be possessed, he faces a choice: spiral into bitterness, or turn inward and seek the missing parts of himself. The unattainable woman becomes both his tormentor and his liberator. She is the flame that can burn him to ashes, or the light that can guide him into wholeness. And what of the woman in this story? She, too, holds power she may not yet understand. By remaining unattainable, she forces him to wrestle with himself, but she must not mistake his struggle for love, nor his pursuit for devotion. The wise woman sees obsession as a mirror of the male unconscious, not as a crown upon her head. Her power is not in being worshipped, but in choosing from a place of clarity rather than hunger. The deeper one looks into this forbidden craving, the more clearly it reveals itself as a dialogue between archetypes rather than two flesh-and-blood individuals. The woman who cannot be had is less a person to him than a portal, a living symbol of his incompletion. Jung wrote that every man carries within him an inner feminine, an anima, that shapes his entire perception of women. Yet, when he has not integrated this anima, when he has not done the work of individuation, she projects outward violently, attaching itself to the nearest figure who stirs his unconscious. The unattainable woman becomes that projection's vessel, unwilling yet irresistible. She stands at the crossroads of his psyche, both angel and tormentor, awakening something he cannot name. He sees in her the promise of completion, of transcendence, of escape from the gnawing silence within himself. But what he does not see is that no woman, no matter how radiant, can carry the weight of another's unresolved soul. To crave her is to attempt to outsource his own healing. To demand her presence is to beg another to fill the cracks he has refused to face. And you, as the woman, feel this current even if it goes unspoken. You sense the weight of his gaze, the restless pull of his pursuit, the way his energy coils around you as though you are the missing key to his locked door. You may even feel flattered, powerful, chosen by fate itself. Yet, beneath that intoxication, you must also feel the heaviness, the knowledge that what he wants is not truly you, but what you represent. This is why men often spiral into despair when denied. They do not mourn the woman herself. They mourn the collapse of their projection. Without her, they are forced back into the void they sought to escape. Rejection is not simply rejection. It is a shattering of the illusion that she could make them whole. And so the craving turns obsessive, sometimes destructive, because the unconscious resists its own exposure. Do you see now the danger of mistaking this hunger for love? True love seeks union between two souls standing in their fullness. Obsession seeks possession to silence inner fracture. The difference is vast, and yet in the heat of pursuit, it can feel indistinguishable. Many women, unguarded, step into the role of savior, thinking his need proves his depth. They surrender, hoping his craving will transform into cherishing. But it rarely does. For once, his projection collapses into reality. The spell breaks, and she is left with the bitter ashes of disillusion. And still, there's another layer, deeper and darker. Men crave the unattainable because she evokes the archetype of the forbidden goddess, the one they are told they cannot touch, cannot conquer, cannot consume. From Eve to Aphrodite, from Mary Magdalene to the femme fatale, history has carved the image of the woman who is both desired and condemned. To want her is to rebel against order, to taste danger, to step into the unknown. The male psyche, wired for conquest, trembles before this paradox. She is the gate to his ecstasy and the threat to his control. Every refusal, every distance she holds, only sharpens this edge. He tells himself he must win her, not only to claim her, but to prove himself to the gods within his own unconscious. To have her would mean he is worthy. To be denied means he is small. And so, his craving becomes existential. It is no longer about desire, but about identity itself. This is why Jung's teachings strike with such force here. The anima, when unintegrated, enslaves. It pulls the man outward, binding him to figures who carry its image until he either collapses into despair or dares to reclaim it inwardly. The unattainable woman is the catalyst, not the cure. She is the mirror that reveals whether he is capable of wholeness or destined to remain fractured. And for the woman, understanding this liberates her from confusion. She does not need to feel guilty for his obsession, nor responsible for his torment. She must not carry the burden of being his savior. Her task is to remain sovereign, to see clearly, and to resist the temptation of mistaking projection for genuine love. Because here lies the subtle danger. Obsession can seduce her too. To be adored with such intensity, to feel like the center of a man's universe, can awaken her own wounds. The hunger to be seen, to be valued, to be irreplaceable. If she confuses this projection with truth, she risks losing herself in his fantasy. She risks trading her sovereignty for the fleeting thrill of being idolized. But the woman who sees with clarity holds the greater power. She recognizes the archetypal dance for what it is. She refuses to be reduced to symbol or savior. She stands in her wholeness, and in doing so, she transforms the dynamic. She no longer exists as the unattainable prize of his ego, but as a sovereign being who chooses, rather than one who is chased. And yet, the more this dance unfolds, the more it exposes the fragile machinery of male desire. What a man craves in the woman he cannot have is not just her beauty, her presence, or her essence. It is the drama of distance itself. The chase is the intoxication. The struggle is the fire. What would he be without the barrier, without the no that sharpens his hunger, without the silence that forces him to listen to the storm inside himself? To him, the unattainable woman is the embodiment of resistance. She becomes the crucible in which his ego is tested, where his illusions of dominance collapse, where his shadow emerges, demanding recognition. Every unanswered message, every withheld touch, every refusal becomes a strike against his illusion of control. And it is precisely this loss of control that fuels his desire. He wants her not despite her refusal, but because of it. But here lies the revelation. When he finally breaks through, if he ever does, the illusion crumbles. The forbidden turns ordinary. The pedestal collapses. The goddess becomes mortal once again. And his craving fades, often with cruel swiftness, leaving the woman bewildered, asking herself, was it me he wanted, or the chase itself? The answer is brutal but clear. He wanted the reflection of himself he saw in her denial. He wanted to conquer his own fear of inadequacy through her surrender. He wanted to silence the voice inside him that whispered, "You are not enough," by proving that even the untouchable could be his. Once the battle is won, the mirror dissolves, and the shadow, unsatisfied, moves on to seek another figure to project itself upon. Do you see why this truth is forbidden? Because it unmasks the romantic illusions that culture has woven for centuries. Stories tell of men who move heaven and earth for the love of a woman beyond their reach. But beneath the poetry lies psychology. Much of that passion is not for the woman herself, but for the archetype she awakens. To believe otherwise is to confuse projection with partnership. And yet, this dynamic is not merely destructive. It carries within it the seeds of transformation. If a man dares to look beyond the surface of his craving, if he dares to ask himself why he longs so fiercely for what resists him, he begins to enter the terrain of individuation. He begins to see that his hunger is not for her, but for the missing parts of himself. That the goddess he chases outward is the anima crying for recognition within. For the woman, this awareness is liberation. It frees her from the burden of being defined by his desire. She does not need to play into his projections or carry the weight of his unhealed wounds. She can choose to remain sovereign, to hold her power without being consumed by his hunger. She can look at his craving and know, this is not proof of my value, this is proof of his shadow. And there is even deeper wisdom here for you. The more unattainable you are to yourself, the more others will crave you. When you repress your own desires, when you hide from your own shadow, when you refuse to embrace the forbidden parts of your soul, you radiate a magnetic mystery that others cannot quite reach. Men will sense this distance, and their unconscious will turn you into a mirror of their own incompletion. But if you step fully into yourself, if you integrate your shadow and embrace your wholeness, you become not the unattainable woman, but the sovereign one. And sovereignty is a power far greater than mere resistance. The Stoics, too, saw this truth. Epictetus taught that freedom comes not from possessing, but from detachment. To desire only what is within your control is to walk in peace. The woman who understands this lives untouchable, not because she plays a game of withholding, but because she no longer depends on being desired. Her worth is not measured by who craves her, but by the clarity with which she chooses herself. And so, the forbidden truth is not merely about why men crave the women they cannot have. It is about what this craving reveals of the human psyche, the shadows, the projections, the desperate search for completion. It is about the sacred task of turning inward, of facing the wounds we try to heal through others, of refusing to mistake hunger for love. For in the end, the woman who understands this truth is no longer trapped in the drama of being chased or denied. She becomes the author of her own story. She chooses rather than being chosen. She stands not as an idol on someone else's altar, but as a sovereign soul who knows her own worth. And so the story turns toward its final revelation. The woman who once appeared as a phantom in his psyche is no longer simply the object of his craving. She becomes the mirror of his unfinished self, the reflection of all he has hidden, the embodiment of his longing not for her, but for the fragments of his own soul. When he craves the woman he cannot have, what he truly yearns for is reconciliation with himself. Her distance, her refusal, her silence. These are not acts of cruelty, but the keys that unlock his confrontation with his shadow. Jung spoke of individuation as the path toward wholeness, the integration of the conscious with the unconscious, the ego with the shadow, the masculine with the inner feminine. Without this union, a man remains forever incomplete, chasing outside himself what can only be healed within, and the unattainable woman is the one who makes this truth unavoidable. She denies him not only her presence, but also the comfort of illusion. In her absence, he must either collapse into despair or step into transformation. But what of the woman herself? Her role is both powerful and perilous. If she mistakes his obsession for devotion, she risks being consumed by his projections, reduced to a symbol rather than honored as a soul. If she basks in the intoxication of being worshipped, she may lose herself in the very fantasy that enslaves him. Yet if she sees with clarity, she can free herself from the burden of his shadow. She can recognize that his craving is not proof of her value, but proof of his incompletion. And when she does, she rises into a different kind of power. The power of detachment, of sovereignty, of choosing rather than being chosen. She no longer plays the role of the forbidden goddess in someone else's mythology. She becomes the architect of her own. The Stoics remind us that freedom is found in mastery of the self, not in the possession of others. The sovereign woman embodies this truth. She is not untouchable because she withholds, but because she no longer needs external validation to know her worth. Her silence, then, is no longer a strategy. It is peace. Her distance is no longer a weapon. It is freedom. She does not chase because she has nothing to prove. She does not yield to obsession because she knows the difference between being seen and being projected upon. She understands that love must come from clarity, not compulsion. And in this understanding, she stands unshakable. Men will continue to crave the women they cannot have, for the psyche is eternal in its patterns. But the awakened woman no longer confuses this craving with truth. She knows that obsession is the shadow's hunger, while love is the soul's recognition. She knows that what is denied often appears more radiant than what is given, but that radiance is an illusion born of projection. She knows that to be desired fiercely is not the same as being cherished deeply, and so she chooses differently. She chooses not to be the unattainable, nor the conquered, but the sovereign. She chooses the man who does not need to possess her to feel whole, but who stands whole in himself and meets her as an equal. She chooses the love that is not intoxication, but clarity, not compulsion, but freedom. This is the forbidden truth about why men crave the women they cannot have, because they mistake their own shadows for her light. But for the woman who understands this truth, there is no captivity in being desired, and no emptiness in being refused. She is beyond the chase, beyond the idolization, beyond the projection. She is whole. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.